River Boy by Tim Bowler. Chapter 20. She never said anything about the river boy. When they asked her what happened, she simply said that she had swum, that she had needed to swim and had not meant to worry them all. The story of the river boy remained locked within her. Somehow she felt he was a secret that she was meant to keep to herself, a secret more precious to her than ever now that he was gone.
Yet, during the next few days, while Mum and Dad busied with the funeral arrangements, she still found as she wandered by the river that she was looking for him. It didn't matter that she knew he was gone. Indeed, she would not have wanted to see him again now. The spirit of Grandpa had set off on a new adventure, and she would not want to hold him back. He had left her the painting, Dad said, and she could see him whenever she wanted.
The ceremony at the Braymouth crematorium was simple, just as Grandpa would have liked it. They had considered having his body taken home for the funeral, but quickly discounted the idea. This was the place he had wanted to return to, the only part of his past he had ever acknowledged. It was only right that he should be put to rest here.
Alfred was with them, looking distinctly awkward in the suit and tie, and Mr. and Mrs. Gray, and that was all. The service was brief, and afterwards they wandered out to the gardens overlooking the sea. Dad was crying again, but Jess no longer worried about him as she had done.
He would be well now, just as she, too, would be well, in time when the worst of the pain was gone. And he had Mum, as strong and unflinching as ever, and herself, ready to give him everything she could, and they each had their memories. The following afternoon he drove back to Braymouth on his own and returned with Grandpa's ashes in a small metal urn.
"I've been trying to think on the way back what to do with these," he said, putting the urn on the table. Jess looked at it and felt something stir inside her, a strange inner certainty she would have to express. But Mum spoke first. "What would Pop have wanted done with them?" Dad shrugged.
Don't suppose he ever gave it a thought. You know he was as uninterested in the future as he was in the past. Think of the trouble we had getting him to make a will. But what would he tell us to do with them, if we could ask him now? Chuck 'em in the bin, probably, urn and all. We can't do that. No, obviously. I suppose we could take them home and scatter them in the garden, or bury the urn completely and plant a tree, or...
"Dad," Jess had to speak now. Mum and Dad both looked across at her. "Dad, I know what Grandpa would have wanted." There was a silence in which she almost felt she caught the listening presence of Grandpa himself. Dad watched her for a moment, his eyes searching her face.
Do you want to take them? He said. She felt herself colour. Not on my own. It wouldn't be right. I mean, we should all be together for this. I shouldn't have them to myself. But is that what you want? His voice was very low, but to her relief, without resentment, she nodded, and he smiled at last. Then take them, my love.
Early next morning, the day they were to leave, she put on her swimsuit, placed the urn inside her duffel bag, slung the bag on her back, and left the cottage, heading up the slope.
It was a bright, clear day, and the sound of the river seemed louder, livelier, more irrepressible than ever. She stepped off the path and into the water and strode up against the current, the rocks hard and lumpy under her bare feet, but tolerable enough as she made her way up the cool, splashing stream. And as she walked, she tried to drink in all that she saw and heard and felt. Because
she knew she would never come back to this place. To return would be to destroy a spell, a spell that had fallen upon her for a few short days, but now was passing from her life. Better to leave this place sacred, just as she found it, and let the enchantment live on in memory. But the spell was not yet over.
There was still this last thing to do, and then she could go home and recommence her life. She wandered on, staying in the stream, just as the river boy had done on his way down. And she did not stop until she had reached the upland lake, where she had first seen him, standing at the top of the fall.
She looked up at it, plunging down, with ebullient power, as timeless and majestic as ever, then without hesitation began to climb.
This time the ascent was easy, even without her shoes on. She felt somehow as light as gossamer, as though her body was nothing more than a thought, a whisper. As ephemeral as a cloud, her hand reached straight to holds they seemed to know in advance, holds different to the ones she had used the last time.
She reached the top, took the urn from her bag and studied it for a moment, as the light caught it. Then she threw the empty bag down onto the rocks at the base of the fall and walked on up the rise, and did not stop until she had reached the source, the place where she had sat with the boy and seen the river's life. She sat down again on the same small rock and gazed out again, and there in the distance, unchanged yet ever-changing, was the sea.
She bent down and looked at the mushy ground, at the water oozing up from it as if by some mysterious power, then took the lid off the urn and stared at the strange powdery ash. And her thoughts ran back to Grandpa again, and she remembered his face as she had always known it, with its wicked eyes and laughing mouth, and she thought of his cussedness, his cantankerousness, his sense of humour, and all that he had been, and somehow still was.
And she looked at the ashes, and shook her head. These ashes were not Grandpa. They were soft and unresistant. Moving according to her will, as she tipped the urn from side to side, so unlike him.
The real Grandpa was not there. The real Grandpa was as free as wind and water and sky. He was feeling no pain over this, and neither would she. She tipped the urn and let a tiny portion of the ashes trickle into the water from the source. The water collected them and they started to run down with the current, some catching against the soft earth at the sides, but most of them floating down like tiny seeds towards the greater stream.
She thought back to what the boy had said about the river, that even when it reaches the end, it will already have started renewing itself here. She hadn't understood him then, but she understood now. She tipped again and sprinkled more ashes into the water and watched them float away. Specks of Grandpa's life, but no longer part of him. Nothing to cling on to, nothing to hold him back, or her.
Life would go on again. There was no need for pain, only a wholesome sorrow which would, in time, relent. She looked into the urn and saw it was half full, and stood up and started to walk down in the stream, sprinkling little trails into the water ahead of her and following them down towards the head of the fall.
And when she reached the lip and stood there, just as the river boy had done only a short time before, and felt the power of the stream breaking over her legs and thrusting down into its mad descent. She knew that the spirit of Grandpa was not here in this place of magic, but in her, in Mum and Dad, in Alfred, in everyone who had ever known him.
But the spirit of the river boy was in her alone. She raised her arm and tipped the urn one final time, and the last of the ashes scattered into flight, to be lost in bubbling life.
She stared after them, tears starting again, then threw the urn down into the water and dived after it, and, as she flew down, the air ruffling her face, she caught the river boy's presence one last time. The end.
Thank you for watching.